Right. Hi, everyone. Uh, Hi. I hope you can all hear me. This is slightly disconcerting, of course, because I can't see anyone. But yeah, hopefully you can hear me and you can see me. Excellent. Thank you, Jamie. That is very reassuring. My name is Toby Horry, and I'm the brand director at TUI, based in the UK. Although, of course, rather than being based in our glamorous Luton office, I'm currently based in a shed at the bottom of my garden in Walthamstow. Um, I'm delighted to be able to welcome Catherine, Mark, and Sue with me on stage today. I'm delighted because they are the authors of the book Belonging, copy here, which is the key to transforming and maintaining diversity, inclusion, and equality at work. So it only came out a couple of months ago. It's a fantastic read. And the way we're going to run the session today is that Catherine, Mark, and Sue are going to talk through some key points from the book for about half an hour, and then we're going to have half an hour for Q&A. So I'd encourage you to put your questions in the Q&A as we go along, and then I'll try and get to as many of them as we can when we get through the first half hour. So without further ado, I shall hand over to Catherine, Sue, and Mark. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Toby. I am Sue, and I'm going to share my screen, I hope. Here we go. Bear with me. That now, because I now can't see you. And I'm here today to talk with my co-authors, Mark and Catherine, about belonging and the key to transforming and maintaining diversity, inclusion, and quality at work. I'm going to talk a little bit about why we wrote the book to begin with. Then we're going to talk about some of the stories from the book, some of the tips and some of the techniques, and hopefully engage you all in an exercise to help promote the right state of mind to create a belonging culture. So I'm going to kick off by actually talking about a different book, which is a book that Catherine and I wrote in 2016 called The Glass Wall, which was Success Strategies for Women at Work and Businesses That Mean Business. And the book was a bestseller. A lot of people have been very kind and very complimentary about it. And we gave a lot of book talks. So we gave over 150 book talks. And something started to happen at the end of those book talks, which is that a woman in the audience, and it would be predominantly women that attended the book talks, would put her hand up and say, I've got a question. It's not actually for Sue and Catherine, it's for the organisers of the talk, looking around the room. Can I just ask, where are all the men? And there'd be a pause, and then the organiser of the talk would say, well, it's International Women's Day, and so it's just for women, or this is the Women's Network, and so that's why we've just got women here. And the woman would say, well, if we only ever talk to other women, how is anything going to change? And Catherine and I were very struck by this. And we'd also started to think beyond gender and also about all forms of underrepresented groups and why there wasn't more change in the workplace when there was so much noise and activity about it, in fact. And you may or may not know this, but diversity and inclusion is a £6 billion industry. But the unique research that was conducted for our book by a company called Dynata cast real doubt on the outcomes of that investment. So 1 in 3 people in the UK do not think that they belong in the workplace. Now, you might go, well, 2 out of 3 is not bad. Okay, if you're in a meeting with 2 colleagues and you feel like you belong, then one of them does not. And actually, it's for those of us that do feel that we belong, it's our job to do something about that, I think. It also means for the UK alone that that's 11 million people in the workforce who do not feel that they belong. Over half the workforce, 52%, don't think that their leader takes personal responsibility for diversity and inclusion. Now, that obviously has consequences for how everybody behaves in the workplace because you follow the leader. And for me, most shockingly, I guess, 1 in 3 people have actually experienced bias, harassment, or inappropriate behaviour at work. And if you dig into underrepresented groups in senior management, then these figures become really stark. So I'm just going to read some of these out, and I'm going to, as always, use the terms that people self-identify with. So it's 1 in 3 people overall, 1 in 3 people also of young people, of 18 to 24-year-olds, 48% of LGBTQ+, 60% of mixed race, 34% Asian, 40% Black, 59% disabled, 46% people diagnosed with mental illness, 54% of the neurodiverse. And then overall, 37% of us have witnessed this kind of behaviour. It's really not okay. And it also goes to explain, doesn't it, Catherine, exactly why we're in the situation we are in terms of outcomes.
Yes, it does. And I think the situation we're in is exacerbated by the fact that every so often you get this triumphant announcement about how well we're doing, which, if you feel you're not doing very well, makes you feel even worse. So these figures, the 36% as a result of the Hampton-Alexander review, which set itself the goal of getting 30% of board members to be women on the top 100 companies. I've got no idea why they chose 50%, because women are in fact 30%, because women are in fact 50%, but you know, let's not quibble. So they made this big 36% of directors are women. But actually, when you dug into that figure, it isn't 36%, it's 3% of those 36% are actually women who are in business, in the businesses, driving the businesses day to day and leading those businesses. The other 33% are non-executive directors who are not leading companies. They turn up 4 to 6 times a year, they sit on various committees, but they're not at the top of the organisation, kind of leading the way and shining a light for other women and being an example. There are 11 women CEOs and 6 people, 6 BAME people on those companies. The number isn't good enough. And as Stephanie Mehta says, despite spending billions, companies can't buy diversity. There is something going wrong between the expenditure of the 6 billion and actually seeing results. And, there's reasons behind this, isn't there, Sue? You're on mute.
I didn't put myself, so apologies to everybody, I didn't put myself on mute because when I'm screen sharing, I actually can't see this screen. So I'm just going to carry on sharing. Louise, if you could keep me off mute, that'd be really helpful, because otherwise I'm going to have to keep dipping in and dipping out, and we don't want to interrupt the flow again. So thank you very much. Apologies, everybody. Back to it. Let's share my screen again. Right, so as Catherine was saying, we don't think that the outcomes are there. And this is despite lots of proof that diversity drives profitability. So to quote just one study, it's a McKinsey study that says that boards with more diversity have 35% better outcomes. So it's very substantial evidence. And we believe that what's going on can be summed up by these photos, and we're calling it diversity fatigue. And diversity fatigue works in 2 ways. It affects the very people who it's meant to support, who are sick of yet another initiative that doesn't do anything to change the situation, perhaps just puts them on stage as the poster man or woman for whichever underrepresented group they happen to represent, which puts unnecessary pressure and puts another load on them aside from doing their job, which is actually what they're paid to turn up and do. So they're fed up of it, but so are the very people who are still currently in control of companies. And that's straight white men. They're sick of yet another initiative that makes them feel in the wrong and excluded. And so we don't think that the current £6 billion is working because it's not pointed in the right direction.
We're witnessing inclusiveness inclusiveness initiatives, that's very hard to say on a Friday when you've had a long week, that exclude the people who are in charge. So they don't feel invested in it. They don't think they've got a role to play. So why should they be bothered about the outcomes? And as Asif Sadiq says, who's head of Adidas Diversity, he says diversity is great, and it is, because as Sue said, you know, it drives profitability. But what we've got to talk about is difference. So if you don't identify in one of the, you know, underrepresented groups, that your difference is just as welcomed. And, you know, we need to create a workplace where people feel that they belong, and it doesn't matter where you're from. It's all about the job that you do. It doesn't matter if you're best friends with the CEO. It's all about your contribution. And if you feel you belong at a company, you'll contribute more. So what we've done in the book is we've created a manifesto for belonging. And as with our previous book, The Glass Wall, it's a practical guide. It's got tips and tactics. So in there are case studies and exercises. There's ways of driving culture change if you're in an organization that recognizes that it needs to change. People talking about being belonging champions and how they achieved it. People talking about their experiences as well, whether they're good or they're bad. That unique research that Sue talked about, and all of this is based in the real world. It's not a highfalutin kind of, you know, theoretical exercise. It's actually a down and dirty guide about how we can create a workplace that is better and kinder, and where people feel that they belong. And we're just going to tell you a couple of stories from the book. Over to you, Sue.
And this is one that I actually lived through, and it's about the actions of a straight, white, middle-aged man in charge of a company, but it's actually about him instinctively acting to make everybody feel that they belong, and the difference that that made to the culture. So I've worked for my current company for a very long time. I joined it, it was a small buying shop called Media Business, and we grew and we grew through doing good work for our clients. And then at the end of the last century, we were acquired by a global company, Mediacom, and we were folded into their organization. So there was a merger and acquisition. And you may or may not be aware, but you know, mergers and acquisitions don't always work. There's very often too much focus on overheads and resources and not enough focus on people. And particularly in my business, people are our greatest asset. I know it sounds like a cliche. It's probably very, very true in all sorts of sectors, but it's particularly true in a media agency. And so I was part of the senior management. I'd been through a merger actually that had been very unsuccessful in the past and made a lot of people very unhappy. A lot of people had left, including eventually me. And so I was very keen that we would make this merger a success. Still, on the day that we all moved in together, and it was about two companies coming together, about 300 people, moved into our offices, it felt like the first day of school. You know, would you have somebody to play with at lunchtime? Would you have anybody to talk to? What we decided to do was, in order to show everybody where they should sit, but also in an act of friendliness, we would make a mug branded with Mediacom TMB colours, with everybody's name on it, put that mug on their desk, and then they would know where to sit. But it also meant that you could go over to somebody that you didn't know, introduce yourself and say, for example, oh, hello, Toby, I'm Sue, can I make you a cup of tea? Because in the British office, there is no act of friendliness that is more universal than offering to make somebody a cup. So the day comes, 300 people move in, 299 mugs with names on end up on the right desk, but there was one mug missing. Sheila's mug was missing. Now this is where my ex-CEO, Alan, actually came in. Alan couldn't bear that Sheila's mug was missing. Sheila was middle management. She was a regional press buyer, which even in the early 2000s was not exactly the coming medium. But it didn't matter who Sheila was. It didn't matter what her status was. Alan was distraught that she didn't have her mug. He spent all day apologising to Sheila, making up to Sheila, telling Sheila that he would find the mug. I'm so sorry, Sheila, I'm going to sort it out for you. And yes, by the end of the day, he had magicked Sheila's named, branded mug from somewhere, and he'd made her a cup of tea in it. Now, it was the only time he made her a cup of tea. I'm not saying that Alan was a saint, but what I am saying is that his instinct to take this personally, this instinct of extreme responsibility about the fact that everybody in the company belonged, everybody in the company was important to him, was absolutely right. I'd known Alan for a long time by this point, but of course all the people who'd come from the new company didn't know him at all, and they'd had a CEO who had been less hands-on in that respect. They'd had the kind of CEO who really only saw most people when he walked through the office in order to go off to his important meeting or his lunch or his round of golf, who really only interacted with his immediate team, maybe issued a few speeches every now and then. And so all of the people that had joined us were just so thrilled that Alan so genuinely meant that Sheila was important. And because Sheila was important, they were important. And it set the scene actually for a company that has grown and thrived and is now by far the biggest in the UK, but also has a slogan of people first, better results. And we really mean it. And I think this act from Alan was a kind of micro-affirmation, a real sense of including everybody. Now, not all CEOs are like that. Over to Catherine.
No, this is a very different story. This is the story of a woman called Nikki that Sue and I met when we were touring the Glass Wall. And we were speaking to a group of female lawyers, and Nikki told us this story. Nikki is a highly qualified lawyer. She's general counsel at a multinational company, massively important to the company. In fact, she's one of 8 people on the executive committee that run the company day to day. She's the only woman. Never really bothered her before. You know, she was completely comfortable in her role, knew that she knew her stuff. And she said it changed for her on this one day. And she was slightly late to the ExCo meeting. It's a regular time, but she was running a little bit late. So she turned up at the meeting room, put her papers down where there was a gap on the desk, looked around and said, "Oh, I don't have a chair." Slight silence. And into that silence, her CEO said, "Oh, Nikki, don't worry about a chair. Pop yourself down on my knee." It's an interesting thing to say. And there was a slightly stunned silence afterwards. And Nikki said she didn't really know what to say. So I said, "Oh, David, don't be so silly. I'm far too heavy to sit on your knee for the whole meeting. I'll go and get myself another chair." So she rushed off to get a chair so she didn't, delay the meeting any longer. Put her chair down. And she said, as she sat there, as the meeting went along, she felt so embarrassed and so churned up inside, because with that one remark, she was made to feel like she didn't belong there and that she was an outsider, and that as a woman, she would never be taken seriously, because not only had her CEO said to her, "Pop yourself on my knee," which, as she said, he would have never turned around to the chief financial officer, who's a 15-stone ex-rugby player, and said, "Oh, Simon, pop yourself down on my knee," if he didn't have a chair. She said the fact that they'd forgotten to get her a chair in their rush may be forgivable. She said, but the fact that not one of her colleagues turned around and said to the CEO, "David, what are you talking about?" Or even said, "David, Nikki, have my chair. I've always wanted to sit on David's knee," just to take that atmosphere down. She said just stayed with her, and she never quite felt the same after that. She said she always felt that there was always an edge in the room, and she was clearly the only one who felt it. And it is really hard to control your emotions in that moment. How do you call people out? How do you get control of your emotions when you're put in that situation? It's really, really hard. But Mark's now going to take us through an exercise that will help us control ourselves and also help us to be a good ally. So over to Mark.
Thanks, Catherine. So Michael Jordan here is going to help us all to become a good ally now. As Catherine said, very, very difficult situations, very difficult to speak up whether you are the person who is the victim of the comment or the behavior, or whether you wish to be an ally and support the person who is. But this is a really important topic right now. For too long, all the heavy lifting in the area of diversity and inclusion has been with the underrepresented groups themselves. Over the last year or so, there's been a growing awareness that, no, this is everyone's job. We've all got to get involved and move to a more belonging culture. And with that has come a welcome focus on being a good ally. And this is the most obvious example of how to be a good ally is speaking up in the moment when these kind of comments or behaviors are exhibited. It's the most obvious example. It's also, let's be honest, quite a scary one. You could feel very anxious in the moment, especially if the who's made the comment, as they often are, is the most powerful person in the room, or somebody, perhaps the most powerful person in the company, certainly somebody further up the hierarchy than you are. So in that situation, you are going to feel pressure and you are going to feel anxious, but it's important that you speak up. So how can we manage that anxiety and that pressure and channel that and turn it into an energy that gives you the calmness and the authority to speak up? Well, we're going to borrow a technique from Michael Jordan, the most talented basketball player of all time, arguably. And with that came a tremendous pressure. You've got to be the person who wins the game. Everyone's looking to you to turn on the magic. So even though he was supremely talented, he would get very nervous and anxious before games. And he used a very specific technique to calm that anxiety and channel it into an energy to give him the authority to perform. And it was a breathing technique. And if you've never done any breathing techniques, you might think, a little bit too good to be true, right? A bit of breathing is going to calm me down, but it will. It's based on science. It's based on very strong physiological reaction in the body, whereby the breathing triggers the vagus nerve, which tells the brain it's okay to calm down. It's one of the great secrets that human beings, all the animals in the world apart from human beings, understand. The body tells the mind to calm down. So you begin in the body, and we can do this by beginning with breathing. So Michael Jordan's breathing technique was this. Breathe in for a count of 4, hold your breath for a count of 7, breathe out for a count of 8. Why would you do that? Well, we're doing two things. We're slowing the breath down because you don't normally hold your breath, and we're putting all the focus on the out breath because it's a slow, long out breath that triggers the vagus nerve to tell the brain it's okay. It's okay to be calm about this. Okay. If you do 3 or 4 of those, you will calm down, even if you're really quite anxious. However, if you wait until you're in one of these high pressure meeting situations before you try it for the first time, it's not going to be very effective, because although it will be working to calm you down, because it's new and strange to you, that will be ramping up your anxiety, because the first time you do an exercise where you have to hold your breath, it does feel a bit odd. So practice it before you're in the higher pressure situations. And I am going to suggest that we practice it now. And obviously you didn't come along here today expecting to do breathing exercises. So if you don't want to do it, you don't have to. If you have any breathing issues, you don't have to do it. But I'm going to suggest that it would be great if you gave this a go. So we're going to do 3. I'm going to count and you're going to breathe. So follow my counting, not my breathing, because frankly, when I'm counting out loud, my breathing's all over the place. We're going to breathe in for a count of 4, hold for a count of 7, breathe out for a count of 8. Okay, first of all, just breathe normally. Breathe in, breathe out, then breathe in 2, 3, 4, hold 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, out 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, in 2, 3, 4, hold 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, out 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, in 2, 3, 4, hold 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, out 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then breathe normally. Please do continue to breathe. That might have felt strange because it's new. Practice it a few times and it won't feel strange anymore, and it will help to calm you down in any situation of anxiety, and it will help you to be a good ally in the moments when that's needed. And if we can all do that, then we can all contribute to creating a more inclusive and belonging culture that we would all like.
So we've created in the book 2 years' work of research and thinking and conversations, we've created a manifesto. A manifesto create a business world for the 21st century, because so much of business practice is based not just on the 20th century, but even back to the 19th century. And we've got a real opportunity now to reset. So a workplace where everyone feels safe to bring their real selves to work, where everyone feels that they belong in the workplace, where everyone believes that success at their organisation is based on how they can contribute, not who they are or who they know. And importantly, where everyone feels safe enough to challenge and express opinions. To bring about real change in the workplace, everyone needs to feel that they belong, and everyone needs to actively work together to build a better, kinder workplace. We were made most important business book of the year by Esquire magazine, but I think this comment that they've made about the urgency of this subject is just so true. We've got an opportunity to change things. Let's not simply go back to the old norms, but create a better kind of workplace for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Fantastic book, and all the things that we all do. But that was a really good intro to it for people that haven't read it. Now, if you put question in the chat, I've got a few questions just to kick off. So I think what was a bit of feedback there? Sorry. The first question I had was, I think whether you're a company or a small company, one of the difficult things is almost to know where to start. Getting feedback again, sorry. Sorry, still there. So I suppose my first question is, irrespective of what size of company you are, I think that because the topic feels so big, where do you start? What's the first step you can take? Because I think, you read lots of things about, should you do unconscious bias training, or should you run a mentorship scheme, or so, any tips or thoughts on where to start? So I think that sort of taking that first step is sometimes the hardest.
Shall I take this? I think we start with our teams. I think Mark has a really great tip and exercise, which is we get people to talk about how they operate at work. Because what happens all too often is we do 3 hours of interviews, we're then put on a set of desks with people we've got no idea who they are, and no idea, apart from their names, and that's it. And you turn up, and if you're hideously extrovert like me, and you're next to someone who's an introvert who is having a bit of a tough time at work, and I go skipping into work and say, "Oh, hello, Simon, how's today?" And he just goes, puts his headphones on and starts working, I think you're a bit unfriendly. Actually, what it could be is that Simon is really under pressure at work to deliver a project. And the way that he does it is by putting his headphones down and just completely getting into it, because that's the way he likes to work. So get your teams to say, this is how I like to work when I'm on a good day, and this is the support I need, and this is what I'm going to be like. And on a bad day, this is the support that I need. So for me, I know that when I need support, I quite often phone Sue up and say, I'm thinking about this, is it A, B, or C? Because I know that Sue, doesn't have an axe to grind, but she's been doing it for far too long now, bless her. But it is that thing about having the ability for you to understand where your colleagues are, and to notice that if they're in that particular state, you know how to react. Because we never do that. We all know about what each other's pets are called, but we don't know anything about how they deal with certain situations at work. So that's a really great place to start, just to get people talking, I think. You got anything to build on that?
So I would add that if you are a company of any reasonable size, so obviously not if it's 3 people because it would be too obvious, but data is really good. So we do an annual belonging survey at MediaCom, in fact we're taking it globally, which asks people if they feel they belong, but also asks questions about, would you recommend this workplace to a colleague, and do you feel as though you're heard? Do you feel as though you're included in important meetings? Do you feel that the senior leaders really represent you? So collecting data is a great place to start, because then that can tell you where to focus. And I mean, just on unconscious bias, it's not proven to be something that changes things. So I think it's good for, there's all sorts of things that are really good for awareness raising, but for practical steps to change things, there is, I mean, we sound like we're flogging the book, but there's actions in the book that aren't about going to an away day, but are about how to change the workplace every day.
Cool, thank you. And you've started actually just to touch on what was going to be my second question, which was about measurement. Because I think the other thing I'm very aware of is, you work in a company, or big or small, and you feel like you want to make a difference. But there's always that element of, well, how do I know whether I've made a difference? So any tips or thoughts on how you can actually sort of track whether you're actually making progress, or whether or are you spending some more of that £6 billion on something that's not actually making any difference at all?
Do you want to take that? Because you're, or do you want me to? You're on mute, Mark.
You know more about the measurement than I do. I mean, I think the top line is it's more about measuring how people are feeling than measuring numbers. I mean, measuring numbers is important, but we know in all companies, whenever somebody sets targets, what they end up doing is meeting the targets, even if they're not actually doing what the targets are set out to achieve. So I think measuring how people feel about the company and about the culture is probably the clearest indication of whether you're really making an actual change.
But in terms of how do I know if I'm doing something to make a difference, do you know what? Do something to make a difference. I mean, that's how I feel about that. For me, it's not a should I, if it's about making the workplace kinder, if it's about including people that you've spotted are feeling excluded, if it's about speaking up for the quieter people on the call, if it's about noticing that a colleague hasn't turned their camera on for weeks and weeks and weeks in our current remote working, just speak up, just do something, just reach out and be kind. Because if everybody sets out today to be a champion of belonging tomorrow, then we will have a better kind of workplace, and you can make a difference. Everybody can make a difference. And to quote Karen Blackett, who is my ex-CEO at Mediacom, but now runs our holding company, Group M, and she says, and she wrote the foreword for the book, and she says that she was always brought up to understand that the way that you change the world is to change your world. And I think that's really important. If you can change the atmosphere in a meeting that you're in, or a chat that you're in, or reach out to a colleague, then you are changing the world. You're making the world a better place.
Cool, thank you very much. And again, you just started to touch on actually the first question we've had in the Q&A, so do keep putting questions in. A question being, how do you think the COVID pandemic has changed belonging, especially with regard to remote working, which obviously a lot more of us are now doing than we would have ever done in the past?
Shall I take that? I think it's made it harder for some organisations where it was all about physical proximity, created that sense of belonging rather than a culture that was genuinely inclusive. I think that some people have found the remote working thing amazing because it really suits the way that they like to work. Other people have found it, I mean, certainly within my organisation, some people have loved it, some people have really struggled with it. As colleagues to other people, to Sue's point, if you notice someone isn't putting on their camera, if you're running, quizzes or what have you, they're not turning up, or they just seem kind of slightly, just call them up. Just say, I just want to, 5 minutes. And it could be on the pretext of, I need your input on this, and just get a little bit of a steer on them, because the whole screen thing is transactional. If I'm in a meeting and I notice that someone is looking like they want to say something, you can just look at them and say, Claire, I think you've got to build on this. When there's 50 people on a screen And there is always someone who decides that, you know, they must talk more than somebody else. And it's really hard, you know, unless you're the person who's in control of mute, to mute them. It's quite hard for those people who are shy about speaking up or don't feel comfortable, or, you know, particularly, and this is, you know, a feedback to kind of the glass wall. Women always think that they have to ask the absolutely perfect question or make the perfect contribution. And what they do is they sit there waiting for the perfect moment. And you can bet your bottom dollar that 2 minutes after you think I should have said something, then someone else, will, probably a man, but not always against, but someone else will say that beautiful thought that you had, you know, or your idea. So it is that thing which is, you know, do certain things, which is, you know, I'm very lucky. I have an association with RADA, but lean in, you know, put the camera, if you want to make a point, put your hand up. Don't wait, just put your hand up, or say in the chat, I've got a build, or can I just say something? Just, you know, no one's gonna call you out. It's not, you know, it's not life or death. You just need to be present and to support other colleagues as well, to show by example, I think. Sue, have you got any builds on that? Sorry, I've whittled on a bit.
Well, I know it's a great answer, but I'm going to build by talking about what happens next as well, because some organisations are going to be in the situation where they're doing hybrid working. So some people will be in the office, other people won't be in the office. And making sure that that's inclusive, I think, gives us a whole new set of challenges, because we've all been sort of forced to work one way and another way over the last few months. But as we move back into the office, as perhaps, you know, there might be somebody in the team who now wants to work more flexibly and have the opportunity to do the school run, so may not be in certain days. How do we make sure that that woman doesn't feel as though she's excluded from the team? What do we do when there's 5 people in the meeting and 4 of them are in the office and 1 of them is on a call? We weren't great at that pre-pandemic in my organisation. We would have people dial in, but we'd pretty much then forget that they dialed in and just start talking amongst ourselves. If we're going to reimagine what the workplace is like, we've got to put real active effort into trying out new etiquette, actually new meeting etiquette, new remote mixed with together ways of working. At the moment, I haven't seen anybody who's got the perfect answer to that. There's all sorts of technological stuff that you can throw at it, but it's going to be down to how we behave, and again that we'll go out of our way to include each other.
I mean, just to stretch the cup of tea story. I mean, in a hybrid working environment, clearly, is it bad if you make a cup of tea for everyone who's in the meeting, and then the 3 people who aren't there and they don't get a cup of tea? Well, maybe you could Deliveroo them or something possibly, but you might be overdoing it. Thank you. So a question for Barsha, and actually this was connected with another question I was going to ask. So I was going to ask about, are there any companies or organizations that you think are doing this well? And Barsha's question is basically, are there any industry recognized tools that you see organizations using who are already committed to change and they're successfully using that we could either access or learn from? So it's companies and the tools that they're using. Mark, did you?
I'm not sure about specific tools, but one thing that I think is important is something that's starting to happen in the advertising and media industry, is that companies are talking to each other about this and saying, whatever we do in this area, we're not going to use for competitive advantage. This is not what this isn't right for that. We should all talk to each other about what we're doing, and we should all share our best practice, even though normally we're fierce competitors and we keep everything very secret and try and make it a point of difference. We should commit that in the area of diversity and equity and inclusion, we should just move forward as an industry and actually not be competitors here to make the most progress as quickly as possible. So I wouldn't talk about specific tools, but I think that attitude, if that could spread into other industries, and it may have already started in some areas, I think that would be incredibly helpful.
I'll build on that, because MediaCom have got some great work practices that they're sharing with the industry. Channel 4 have shared their menopause policy. That's widely available. You can access that on via the Ad Association. There's a miscarriage and child loss policy as well that's now being widely shared. So one of the things that the industry is now doing is through employee resource groups, sharing things that have worked for organisation, you know, and are proven for organisations, so that we can. And I'm certain that if you want a menopause policy or a child loss policy, or some of the things that, you know, some of the stuff that Mediacom have shared more widely, just, you know, reach out. It will be readily available, and you know, I'm certain that we would be happy to share it with other industries. You know, Mediacom are already sharing a lot of the things that they do with both media partners, clients, and other agencies as well. So happy to kind of provide a conduit or provide a guide if someone wants anything specific. So have you got a build on that?
That's it. I don't think, I know it's an awful cliche, no one said it yet, the journey. I don't think anybody's reached there. Let's help each other on the journey, I think.
So thank you. And yes, a slight segue. The program about the menopause hosted by Davina McCall on Tuesday was fantastic. So if anyone didn't watch that, then I'd highly recommend it. It was really good. Next question from Natalie. So we talked a little bit about data gathering as a starting point. But clearly, with the sort of data we're talking about, there may be some people who are maybe slightly uncomfortable providing that information. Any thoughts on that, either in terms of, you know, how you persuade people to give the information, or just how you frame things such that people feel safe in being able to give that information, which obviously can be sort of quite personal?
So it all needs to be anonymised. It needs to be an outside survey provider. And I think the very quantity, the proportion of people who feel that they are safe to fill in the survey is actually one of the first indicators. So if you get 95% survey filled in, but an average score, that's probably better, I'm exaggerating here, than 10% filling it in with a fantastic score. So I think, and a good survey provider, and we'd be happy to help with that as well, of course, we'll take that into account. But it also needs to be sent from, and with a request from the very top of the company. You know, this is something. The point about your leader needs to take personal responsibility for this is really important.
Yeah, we've just done a brands, media owners and media agencies via the Ad Association, and that all came from the CEOs. And how we drove participation was by saying, you are in control of changing our industry. So if you don't speak up, how is anything ever going to change? And we called it All In. So everyone was all in, and we've had an amazing response. And everyone said we'd be lucky if we got 6,000 responses, and we got something like 18,000. So we were delighted. And happy to share how we did that if anybody wants it as well.
Fantastic, thank you. Another question that I had, just picking up on something in the book, and I think, so before this session, I was actually in a session about male allyship, which is clearly a really important sort of initiative. But one of the things that you talked about in your book is about having different types of people in your life. So the piece about having the sponsor, the wingman, the cheerleader, the ally, and I felt that really resonated. I wonder if you could just talk a bit more about that, about having the different types of people in your I suppose personal and professional life that you can turn to in different circumstances. Would that be useful? Is that the best?
Yeah, I'll take this. So it's a bit like your private board of advisors. It's like your own non-executive directors board. People fulfill different roles. So a mistake that I made probably in the early days of my career was thinking that my buddies in the workplace were also the people that I should go to for best advice. Now that's not the same thing at all. Someone who you go and have a glass of white wine with at the end of the day and moan about, you know, what your manager has said to you, or you know, how somebody's left you out of something. That's not advice. That's soaking it up together and sharing emotionally. Advice comes from a mentor or a sponsor or an ally. So just to talk a little bit about the differences between them, or a wingman or woman. So a wingman or woman, to start with, that is probably one of the most important roles. And that's the person who gives you advice that you wouldn't give yourself, sometimes quite tough advice, but also promotes you when you're not there. So I have very much found that Catherine has had this role in my life. I know that if I've got a problem with something, and she knows a lot of the same people that I know, but she doesn't have the same relationship sort of work-wise with them, she'll empathize a bit, but then she'll give me some very practical and sometimes quite difficult to follow advice in that sense. But when I do follow it, it's always the right thing to do. But I also know that I can count on Catherine to speak up for me when I'm not there. So she's a great wing woman, and I'd recommend to everybody, if you haven't got one, go and find somebody. And I would obviously do the same for her, and there's a very strong level of trust. An ally is something slightly different. An ally your allies might be the people that you go to a regular meeting with, where you feel like you're always spoken over by somebody else, and they might feel the same way. And so you sort of do a mini bit of a gang up. It can be, it could be another woman, it could be a man, it doesn't really matter, gender doesn't come into it, where I might go, Toby, when we're in that meeting, Kate never listens to anything either of us says. And how about next time you say something, I say, oh, sorry, everybody, did you hear what Toby said? And vice versa. So that could be, again, a great way of getting standout in a regular meeting. A sponsor is somebody who speaks up for you within the company that you're in. So their role is to speak up for you in those promotion meetings, in those opportunity meetings. It's to make up the old boy network, which frankly, I've never accessed in my entire life, and I don't know about the rest of you. But it's that kind of thing where somebody goes, you know what? Mark would be a good chap for that kind of thing. Have you considered Mark for this? So that's a sponsor. And then a mentor will be somebody, and I personally think better outside the company that you're working in, who will look at your career with quite a cold eye. And when you're immersed in I don't know what to do about such and such because I'm stuck here, they'll say to you, well, why don't you just do X, Y, and Z? And it suddenly seems so obvious. So mentors, buddies, allies, sponsors, wingman or woman, create your own cast. You do not have to tell them that they are it, by the way. I mean, obviously Catherine knows, but in the past, I once went and asked somebody, in fact, I asked 3 people to be my mentor, and they all turned me down, which was a bit of a blow. They all said they didn't have time, but I kept them as my private mentors. And when I had a problem, I just went and asked them what their advice was. So you can do it, together with them, or you can just get on with it. But it's makes such a difference. You do not have to fight your career on your own.
You don't have to tell them. You don't have to give them T-shirts saying congratulations, you've been made my mentor. Yes, that's a very good point. Thank you, Sue. One other point I wanted to ask was the piece about belonging and making everyone feel that they belong, in any organisation. But of course, in any organisation, it's also important that you're able to disagree and have disagreements, which on one level may feel like they're sort of quite counter. So how do you feel that you operate successfully in an organisation where you can disagree with each other, but that at the same time everyone feels that they can belong in that organisation? Because I know that you did cover an element of that in the book, didn't you?
Yeah, we go into this in quite some detail in the book and put some specific techniques in place. I think it's important that people understand that you can disagree without having a big row. You can challenge somebody without upsetting them, and you can disagree about something and still work together as a team. You just have to know what you're doing, and you just have to have a process in place to do it. So in the book, we go into how to disagree, and it's a process, and how to disagree and then commit to some working together, and that's another process, and how to say no, how to challenge your boss, that's another process, and also how to say no to someone as well without upsetting them. So just to give you an example how to disagree, the beginning of that process is understanding that there are normally three kinds of disagreement. We normally disagree for one of three reasons. One is we are looking at different facts and different data. So we've come at the issue with different facts and data, so we see it differently, so we disagree. The second one is we've got the same facts and data and information, but we're interpreting them in a different way, and so we disagree. And the third type is, yeah, we actually fundamentally disagree. We see the world differently. Now, most disagreements fall into the first two categories, and if they do, and if you're emotionally intelligent enough to understand that and talk about that and step back from the disagreement and say, and understand this process, what data are you, what facts have you got that make you think that? Because these are the facts I've got that make me think this. You don't have to have a row about it. It's very easy to resolve. And it doesn't mean it's a lovely world where everyone's happy and everyone's friends and everyone always agrees, but you can find a way through it without having a huge row. You know, the third type, where you fundamentally disagree, that's different, and you need a different model for how to get through that. But most disagreements don't even get that far. So it's about having this actually training people and making people understand that there are ways to disagree, which means you can still carry on working and collaborating and still liking each other.
Yes, and as you say, there's some really good practical exercises and things you can do in the book, which really sort of cover this how to disagree. So yeah, I've definitely found that really helpful when I've come across those sort of slightly more tricky circumstances, but coming out of it without feeling you've had to have a blazing row with someone, which is always good, I think. So so we're getting towards the end of the time. There was one question sort of picking up on the data, you know, about how, you know, 1/3 of people don't feel they belong, which obviously means that, you know, on this call, there are people who probably don't feel that they belong in their organizations. I mean, what advice would you give to people who don't feel they belong in an organization? It's quite a big question, I realize, but Sue, did you want to start that one?
Yes, I've been thinking about this, and I think that so before I worked where I currently work, I didn't feel like I belonged, and I'd worked at 2 or 3 other agencies, and I thought it was something you just had to put up with in the workplace. And the big difference to me came from my leader when I first joined, reaching out to me and actually making it clear to me that he valued my contribution. But if I look back now to where I'd worked before, I think if I hadn't have just thought it was me that didn't belong, if I thought maybe some other people felt like they didn't belong as well, I could have really made my situation better by trying to create a sense of belonging amongst more people. So I would say, whether you feel like you belong or whether you don't feel like you belong, if you can become a champion for belonging, if you can become a champion for inclusion, then that will help you find your place in the organisation. What do you think, Catherine?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think all too often, if you think you don't belong, then you think it's just you. And actually, Mark's got great evidence, which is even straight white men who, you know, most people see as being the people who drive, you know, organisations and are all part of an all boys club, and they all talk about football and what have you. 45%, I think it is, Mark. 45%.
46. Yes, close enough.
Yeah, feel that they're covering up at work, that they can't be their real selves. So actually, it's not just you. Everyone is, you know, probably the majority of people turn up to work every day and have a work face. You know, they have that kind of work persona. And, you know, you go into work and you're very jolly, and then you know, happen to meet them somewhere else with when they're out with friends, and people go, no, they're really miserable. They normally don't say a word to us because they're knackered from going into work and doing jazz hands every day. So I think it is that thing about, it isn't just you. There's lots of other people. People don't feel they belong all the time. I mean, God, I run my organisation. Sometimes I don't, you know, I'm the CEO. I sometimes don't feel that I belong, you know, because you're just a bit out of it. You're out of the rhythm sometimes. You know, you come back from holiday and, you know, probably a beautiful holiday organised by one of the members of this fine organisation. you know, and you come back and there's a joke going on, there's something happening and you don't know, and you think, oh, I'm not part of this. This is all a bit weird. It's just, you know, just reach out, you know, and accept the fact that you can find allies and people within the organization, and it isn't just you, it's lots of people.
That's what you think on that one.
Sorry, in terms of the advice. Oh, so your mic's off, Sue. Sorry.
As a male ally, as a champion of belonging, as I know you are, what would your advice to somebody who feels that they don't belong?
Well, I mean, I think it's so difficult, isn't it? But I think that the point about changing your world and changing the world is really, really good. I mean, I think you know, I clearly don't think that TUI is perfect in equality, diversity, inclusion. And I suppose last year I sort of sat there thinking, well, I can either just sit there thinking sort of grumpy about this, or I can do something about it. So one of the things I did was set up an employee network to have conversations about diversity, equality, and inclusion. So now clearly that on its own is not, you know, I've not fixed everything, and everything is not perfect. But I think that point about taking sort of taking personal responsibility to see what you can change. I mean, I do think that probably, unfortunately, there probably are still organisations where no matter what you do, you'll never get to the feeling that you belong. But I think, you know, and if you get to that point, then I think probably looking to, unfortunately, make a move is the right thing to do.
That's true. There are some there were some places, some stories that Catherine and I heard when we were doing the glass wall talk, where we ended up going, no, just leave.
Yeah.
I tried very hard.
Just leave. There is an answer. Just leave. It's hideous. Yeah.
But most places can get better.
I think we've probably just got time for one last question from Alessandra, which is, because you guys, I mean, this is obviously a travel and tourism forum, and you guys aren't, you know, strictly speaking from travel and tourism. What's your perception of how diverse and inclusive you think the travel industry is as a whole?
Oh, that's such an interesting question, because of course it's a worldwide organisation, and what I know from sitting on, so I sit on Mediacom's Global Belonging Council, is that diversity and inclusion issues are very different from region to region. And also, as somebody once pointed out to me, levels of deference expected from women are very different in different societies around the world. So growing up in London, you know, I have no idea about the level of deference that could be expected in, you know, some other parts of the world. So we do know that there is a big mix of people involved. I do sense, though, that just as with the rest of business generally, there isn't enough advancement of women. And what we do know is that the World Economic Forum data about gender parity worldwide said that there would now be, it's now going to take 136 years for there to be gender parity around the world, which I haven't got time for that. It's gone up 36 years in the last 12 months. And in fact, none of us do. So there is much, much more to do. I would just say to everybody, don't be satisfied with the status quo. Don't over worry about fitting in with the way things are now, because the times are changing.
Amazing. Well, I think we're out of time. So so much, Mark, Catherine, and Sue, for such a brilliant talk and for answering the questions. Yes, do rush out to your nearest bookshop and buy Belonging, because it is fantastic. And as I say, I mean, you read a lot of business books, but I think the ones that I gravitate towards are the ones which have a slightly more practical advice that can actually go and do something about. And this definitely fits in that camp. So yes, thank you so much for your time today, and we'll see you all again soon. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Hi, hello everyone, and thank you to our speakers who have just sort of come off stage. Very interesting talk. And I do want to say that if you checked your swag bag that was sent to you via email before the forum started on Monday, you should have received also a voucher for I believe it's 20 or 25% discount to buy the book. And I got a copy, I'm halfway through, is definitely worth reading and delving into. Now, before we have our little break, I just wanted to give a little bit more information about what's coming up next, because this afternoon, our very final session is reverse mentoring. And of course, last year in Iceland, this was probably the best session in that people found it extremely fulfilling and sort of exciting to be able to share their sort of viewpoint and ideas with senior leaders. So if Louise from DigiLeader has just put a slide on which you can click so that you make it bigger and you can see the text. But basically what's going to happen after the break, you will be assigned to a table randomly. And the idea is that the table will have its own mix of senior and sort of less senior, or perhaps sort of just people from more junior talent, different background. If then in those tables, the idea is that you are going to share ideas and you are going to share thoughts about your concern or your aspiration or your challenges. It's an opportunity to really come together and discuss some of really key topics. So it's important that you feel totally free to discuss what matters to you and what matters to your table. The discussion is by table, so don't move around during that discussion, because the idea is that you sort of build a little bit of relationship with your table, and then sort of feel safe, feel also that you can talk freely and not be judged, nor you should judge others, and really enjoy the session. Last year, I might sort of try and go around a little bit to just sense what the discussion is going to be. And the idea is that we come then at the end together in a kind of sort of chat that enable us to share some of the thoughts and some of the ideas that we have shared at our table. So do stay on for this final session. After the reverse mentoring, we are going to conclude the afternoon with Zina Bencek, the chair of the conference, giving us a summary and some really interesting outcomes and also important news. If I am excited and I want you to feel the same, because there are some really great things to share, some initiatives, some outcomes that we are going to launch over the next couple of weeks as a result of this forum. So stay tuned and come back after the break to join the reverse mentoring. Thank you.